ॐ परतत्त्वे सदा लीनो रामकृष्णसमाज्ञया यो धर्मस्थापनरतो वीरेशं तं नमाम्यहम्. We have been studying here Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga, and we are in the fourth chapter named Maya and the Evolution of the Conception of God. In the first chapter, Necessity of Religion, Swamiji has shown that without the struggle to go beyond the senses or the struggle towards infinity, life is incomplete. In the second lecture on the real nature of man, Swamiji has shown that the real nature of man is infinite, transcendent, immanent, all-pervading, one without a second, consciousness and bliss. And the present nature as it appears to us is unreal, at the most something like a reflection. And this has to be realized. And then in the lecture on Maya and illusion, Swamiji showed why we are not able to realize the reality, why we are seeing these unreal things, why we are seeing our vision, why it is limited. And there he explained that the main cause is that we have running after these senses, and that has made one mist-like between us and the reality. And so the fact remains that we are mixing up the real and the unreal, and that is our present state of life. And this has made contradictions in every field of life. So, when Shankaracharya declared that it is a fact of life, Swamiji has shown it in every sphere of life. Contradictions, 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 because it is a mixture, coupling of the real with the unreal. And so, abruptly, it ended by Swamiji telling us that the personal God is not the solution. Personal God is only the beginning, and we have to reach the absolute Nirguna Brahma to solve this problem. Now, in the present lecture, Swamiji wants to explain why in the scriptures, in the ancient scriptures, whether they are Hindus or Greek or any ancient scripture, why the image of God or the personality of God is repugnant in today's our mind. And he has told that man, when he evolves, then his conception of God also evolves. God is unchanging, but the man's conception of God will be according to the nature of his mind. So first he only felt that God is more powerful than us. And so his God was God of power. What he did was the right. No question of whether he is doing right or wrong. This ethical sense had not arisen. But slowly we found that unselfishness is the only real life. And so then as per our unselfishness grew, the image of God also changed. And in the last class, we saw up to this point that he means the God, became the most ethical being in the universe as well as almost almighty. Almost almighty because the world he created he could not destroy. So almost almighty and most ethical being in the world as per our idea of ethics. But now we see today's portion. But all this patchwork would not do. So this is a patchwork. That means when we are evolving, our ideas are evolving, and we are modifying our ideas of God and making him more ethical and more powerful. And so this is a patchwork. As the explanation assumed greater propositions, the difficulty which it sought to solve did the same. Difficulty is why in this God's world, why there is misery, why there is inhuman behavior among the human beings, why there is evil. And this by explaining God as the ethical or more powerful will not do. So the problem, the difficulty which it sought to solve did the same. That means it assumed greater proportions. Man understood that this is no solution. If the qualities of the God increased in arithmetical progression, the difficulty and doubt increased in geometrical progression. This is Swamiji's pet expression. We have seen it more than once, that arithmetical progression is that which runs with a similar difference, like 4, 8, 12, 16, and geometrical is that which runs with a similar proportion. If 4, 8, next will be 16, next will be 32. So it will jump. So as our idea evolves about the God, but our difficulties, that this is no solution. Is he impartial? If God is impartial, then he is cruel. If he is partial, then how it is God? Jehovah, why he liked a person, why he did not, could not be understood. In the Bhagavatam, we saw the same thing about Krishna. He did not like that washerman. So he just hit him and killed him. Why? So our rationality increased, our idea of ethics increased, and so it went on by geometrical progression. The difficulty of Jehovah was very little, besides the difficulty of the God of the universe. And this question remains to the present day. That is most important statement. Because those who believe in a personal God, monotheistic religions, monotheistic sects within Hinduism and all other monotheistic religions, monotheistic means one God. They are not able to solve this problem. And so Swamiji's Jnana Yoga has to take us above that. And Swamiji shows that unless we have the concept of the Nirguna Brahman, impersonal God, and in the light of that we can see the Sagun Brahman. But those sampradayas, those religious sects which do not accept or understand the position of the absolute Nirvikalpa, Nirguna Brahman, and they assume that the limit is this monotheistic God or the Saguna Brahman is the limit, their questions remain the same. They cannot explain. They will say that God did this because he is God. So, this is the important statement Swamiji has made while bringing us up right from Jehovah. He brought us to this monotheistic conception and says this is a patchwork. The difficulty, the question remains to the present day. That means in all the religions and sects at the present day, those who do not understand the concept of the Nirguna Brahman, the Absolute, those who do not understand that the world is unreal, that world is like a shadow, they cannot explain many things in this world. Why did God this like this? So it remains to the present day. You understand? It remains to the present day. That means those sampradayas, except for the Advaita Vedanta, no other sampradaya will be able to explain the world in relation to the God which they posit as a patchwork. When they posit a God in relation to him, they cannot explain what is happening in the world. All the religious sects today, except the Advaita Vedanta. And so, This question remains to the present day. Swamiji is explaining the question now. Why under the reign of an almighty and all-loving God of the universe, almighty and all-loving, that is how they propose, of the universe, should diabolical things be allowed to remain? We see with open eyes and this question always haunts us. Why these diabolical things be allowed to remain? Why so much more misery than happiness? And so much more wickedness than good? When we see with open eyes, we see what is there in the universe. We may shut our eyes to all these things, but the fact still remains that this world is a hideous world. Swamiji is explaining why the world is hideous. At best, it is the hell of Tantalus. You should understand the hell of Tantalus. Equivalent in India is the Vasudeva Pala. When we learn physics and the system of siphons, there is a figure and the water level rises. But just when it comes to his lips, it goes down automatically. He can't drink at all. And he has been asked to roll up a lump of gold above a hill. But when it takes to the top, it slides down again. So, man is unable to fulfill any of his need perfectly. That is Tantalus' hell. And this is a fact of the world. As Swamiji said, we may ignore it, but we cannot. Always this difficulty remains. Let us be happy in this world. That means shut our eyes. And we cannot always remain shutting our eyes. In the real nature of man, Swamiji has shown, death comes, then what will you do? So, at best it is the hell of Tantalus. Here we are with strong impulses and stronger cravings for sense enjoyments, but cannot satisfy them. The cravings go on increasing. Man, every day, the tastes in food are six only. But man every day discovers a recipe, and yet his desire grows and grows and grows. Every sense is like that. Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasagandha, everywhere the desires are increasing. There rises a wave which impels us forward in spite of our own will. And as soon as we move one step, comes a blow. So we want to enjoy and we cannot. We are all doomed to live here, like Tantalus. We want to live infinite life and we find this difficulty. Ideas come into our head far beyond the limit of our sense ideas. But when we seek to express them, we cannot do so. On the other hand, we are crushed by the surging mass around us. Yet if I give up all ideality and merely struggle through the world, my existence is that of a brute. And I degenerate and degrade myself. That is what is happening to humanity today. We are ourselves degrading and degenerating today. Neither way is happiness. If we give up the struggle, no happiness. If we are struggling, we are not reaching the goal, there is no happiness. Unhappiness is the fate of those who are content to live in this world, born as they are. 1,000 times greater misery is the fate of those who dare to stand forth for truth and for higher things, and who dare to ask for something higher than mere brute existence here. Swamiji says, 1,000 times greater misery. So those who struggle for idealistic life, 1,000 times is their misery. One must understand this. To children we explain, if you are good, the world is good. But that is never happens. Swamiji has said in his poetry, to a friend is a poem in Bengali. And there he says, the higher is your heart, know for certain that much misery you have to face. Know that. The higher is your heart, the more misery you have to face. And that Swamiji says, I do not, this world is for those who talk something and have something else in their mind. But for the unselfish lover, the world is very, very difficult. And then Swamiji says, but I do not want you to be coward. You have to struggle. You have to struggle, you have to love unselfishly, but remember that this is the problem. And that Swamiji is quoting here that 1,000 times more important statement. Life is never smooth. That is all right for children, but not real in life. 1,000 times greater misery is the fate of those who dare to stand forth for truth and for higher things, and who dare to ask for something higher than mere brute existence here. These are facts. But there is no explanation. Why it is so? No explanation. There cannot be any explanation. That Swamiji has shown in the chapter on Maya and illusion, that things are contradictory. There cannot be any explanation. No rational explanation can be given of why consciousness and matter are associated. That is the fundamental problem. And so in this world full of contradictions, no solution can be found. But the Vedanta shows the way out. There are two incidents on this point. Very important statement. We are not explaining how this misery and how this thing come, but we shall show you the way out. And the way out is that Advaita. Bhagavan Buddha was asked, what is the cause of all this? He said, if a arrow has hit a person's body, do you want me to discuss from which factory this arrow was made? Who applied poison to that arrow? Or we should take out the arrow and try to heal the man. Another very living and thrilling anecdote is there. Mahapurush Maharaj, Sri Ramakrishna's disciple Swami Shivananda, was sitting in his room. And a young man came looking haphazard and all that, and came running in, rushing in, held Mahapurush's feet and started asking him, can you tell me, sir, why there is so much misery in this world? And the person who saw is describing as if the whole misery of the world has come upon this man. With that eagerness he is asking, why there is so much misery in this world? And to him Mahapurush Maharaj very calmly is telling, I cannot tell you why there is so much misery in the world, but I can help you to get out of that misery. I cannot tell you why there is so much misery in this world, but I can help you to get out of that. And that is what Swamiji is proposing here. That no explanation, there cannot be any explanation, but the Vedanta shows the way out. That means once you understand that this is a Maya, that this is a contradiction, and it is unreal and real mixed together, you will hanker for the reality. And when you go to the reality, which is your own real nature, then this problem will be solved, not till then. You must bear in mind that I have to tell you facts that will frighten you sometimes. So people want to shut their eyes from this. So Swamiji tells, I have to tell you facts. They may frighten you. But if you remember what I say, think of it and digest it, it will be yours. It will raise you higher and make you capable of understanding and living in truth. Shravan Manan Nidasan, Swamiji is prescribing here. But you are frightened first. But if you remember what I say, so this is dharana, conceptualization. Think of it, manana, reflection, by which to make it stronger and stronger. And digest it This is equivalent to nididhyasana. Digesting means assimilating and going beyond. It will be yours. That means Atmasat. It has become yours. It is not my idea then anymore. If you listen, if you think, if you meditate, it will become yours. Otherwise, you are frightened by that. And when it becomes yours, what happens? You rise. We'll raise you higher and make you capable of understanding and living in truth. Understanding and living in truth. So to understand itself is rationally difficult, and after understanding, it becomes such a profound thing that we find it almost impossible to realize it. But Swamiji says, of understanding and living in truth, that means the entire life is so much transformed that you are always living in truth without any contradiction. By Shravan Manandasan, you can reach this place. Now, it is a statement, if it is a statement of fact that this world is a tantalus hell, that we do not know anything about this universe. We have seen through Kant that time, space and causation are in our mind, and we want to know even a speck of dust, it assumes infinite proportions. What we catch in the network of time, space, causation only we know, we do not know its real nature. That we do not know anything about this universe, and yet at the same time we cannot say that we do not know, because by five senses we are making a judgment, by our mind we are making a judgment, in our life practical we are using that judgment, though we are not getting happiness, but we cannot say it is unreal. So Maya is defined as that. We cannot make two cut and dried categories in this world. One is existence, one is non-existence. No. There is a mixture of existence and non-existence. The impossible mixture is there in our consciousness. And yet at the same time we cannot say that we do not know. I cannot say that this chain exists when I think that I do not know it. Next point. How do I know that this chain exists? Any object exists, because I do not know anything about it. So whether it exists or not itself will become a doubt. When we do not know its real nature, how can we say that it exists? It may be an entire delusion of my brain. Swamiji has already told Maya is not illusion and delusion, but to explain this point he is telling. I might have imagined that this is a world. Nobody has seen the world as a fact outside. There is experience. We experience the world is real. But whether what is there to compare our experience with the real? So how do we say that what we are experiencing is real? Important analysis, huh? It may be an entire delusion of my brain. I may be dreaming all the time. I am dreaming all the time. I am dreaming that I am talking to you. What is the proof? You think you are listening to that. That is, I do not know. It is my delusion that you think like that. And that you are listening to me. No one can prove that it is not a dream. Because, why Swamiji is telling? Because in dream we have similar experiences, and there we see them as hard facts. When we wake up, we laugh at them. Now the experiences are so much similar. Subject experiencing object. Same thing in the dream, same thing in the waking state. So how will you know that this is not a dream? I am dreaming that I am talking to you and that you are listening to me. No one can prove that it is not a dream. My brain itself may be a dream. And as to that, no one has even seen his own brain. Nobody can see his own brain. We cannot see the brain unless we die. We cannot see somebody else's see. So nobody has seen that he has a brain. Because you have a brain, I infer that I have a brain. We all take it for granted. Bas. That is life. That is Maya. So it is with everything. My own body I take for granted. At the same time, I cannot say I do not know because it appears to me. Because in the five senses I do see it. This standing between knowledge and ignorance, this mystic twilight, the mingling of truth and falsehood, and where they meet, no one knows. How this real and unreal get mixed up, no one knows. It is impossible logically, and yet it is a fact. We are walking in the midst of a dream, half sleeping, half waking, passing all our lives in a haze. This is the fate of every one of us. So what we think as starkly real may be a dream. This is the fate of all sense knowledge, because sense knowledge comes through the mind. This is the fate of all philosophy, and on that we build up philosophies. Of all boasted science, science also believes in observation, but it does not know how to observe our experience. We just observe objects. This is the fate of all philosophy, of all boasted science, because they think science is objective, science is hard fact. But how do we know? How do we know that the object exists? Of all boasted human knowledge, we think human knowledge is improving. It is improving in the details of wrong knowledge. It is not taking us towards right knowledge. Example, what you call matter or spirit or mind or anything else you may like to call them, the fact remains the same. We cannot say that they are, we cannot say they are not. Understand this problem? We are seeing, feeling, touch, but whether seeing produces a right knowledge or not, what is the validity? We do not know. But we experience them, so you cannot say it is unreal. All, matter or spirit or mind or anything else you may like to call them, the fact remains the same. We cannot say that they are, we cannot say they are not. We cannot say they are one, we cannot say they are many. Some people conclude that one is appearing as all that. But unless you know that one, how will you say that? And some people say there are many, but people are there who see they are one. So all this is relation to my mind. This eternal play of light and darkness, indiscriminate, indistinguishable, inseparable, is always there, permanently there. A fact, yet at the same time not a fact. Fact of our experience. But if we analyze the experience, we find it vanishes. Awake and at the same time asleep, like dream. This is a statement of facts, and this is what is called Maya. So this contradiction is called Maya. We are born in Maya, we live in it, we think in it, we dream in it, we are philosophers in it, we are spiritual men in it. Nay, we are devils in this Maya and we are gods in this Maya. So relative good and bad, somebody calls devils and gods. And our thinking, our dream, we live, everything is happening in this contradictory world. We are spiritual men in it, we are devils in this Maya and we are gods in this Maya. Stretch your ideas as far as you can. Make them higher and higher. Call them infinite or by any other name you please. Even these ideas are within this Maya. Because the mind is within this Maya, the idea is within the mind, so it is also in Maya. This is the fact of life. It cannot be otherwise. And the whole of human knowledge is a generalization of this Maya, trying to know it as it appears to be, not in its own real nature. This is the work of Nam and Rupa, names and form. So there are several ways of putting this Maya. Desh, Kal, Nimitta, time, space and causation is one. Nam, Rup, name and form is another. Subject and object consciousness is still another. So everything, this is the work of Nam, Rupa, name and form. Everything that has form, everything that calls up an idea in your mind is within Maya. For everything that is bound by the laws of time, space and causation is within Maya. So whether we see it as name and form or see time, space and causation, our experience within it is itself within the Maya. Let us go back a little to those early ideas of God and see what becomes of them. So from there, Swamiji brought up to monotheism, said it is a patchwork, showed that it is a contradiction in terms, and then again says, no, let us think what happened to them. We perceive at once that the idea of some being who is eternally loving us, eternally unselfish and almighty, ruling this universe could not satisfy, because why is not answered. Where is the just merciful God? Asked the philosopher. Just and merciful. Does he not see millions and millions of his children perish in the form of men and animals? Or who can live one moment here without killing others? That is the biggest problem. We may not see it, but if we think, we understand. You live because millions die. Every moment of your life, every breath that you breathe is dead to thousands, microbes in the air. Every moment that you make is dead to millions because they are moved out of their place. Why should they die? There is an old sophism, that means not real philosophy, but appears like philosophy, that is called sophism. There is an old sophism that they are very low existences. Who defines low and high? Supposing they are, which is questionable, for who knows whether the ant is greater than the man or the man than the ant? Who can prove one way or the other? Apart from that question, even taking it for granted that these are very low beings, still why should they die? If they are low, they have more reason to live. Why not? Because they live more in these senses. They feel pleasure and pain in the a thousandfold more than you or I can do in the senses. Which of us eats a dinner with the same gusto as a dog or wolf? None. Because our energies are not in the senses. They are in the intellect, in the spirit, but in animals, their whole soul is in the senses. And they become mad and enjoy things which the human beings never dream of. And the pain is commensurate with the pleasure. That is the principle of life. Pleasure and pain are meted out in equal measure if the pleasure felt by animals is so much keener than that felt by man. If it follows that they, the animal's sense of pain is as keen, if not keener than man's. That means we think they are low creatures, but they have pain. if not keener than man. So the fact is, the pain and misery men feel in dying is intensified a thousandfold in animals, and yet we kill them from Maya. Without We kill them without troubling ourselves about their misery. This is Maya. And if we, and if we suppose there is a personal God, like a human being, who made everything, these so-called explanations and theories which try to prove that out of evil comes good are not sufficient. This is Swamiji had discussed in the previous chapter, that good cannot come out of bad. On that principle, I might cut the throats of others because I want the full pleasure of my five senses. That is the reason. There is no reason. Why should good come through evil? The question remains to be answered, and it cannot be answered. So there also our logic fails. The philosophy of India was compelled to admit this. Now, Swamiji is telling this psychology. Why in India we were bold enough? Why in the West they were not bold philosophically? The Vedanta was and is the boldest system of religion. It stopped nowhere and it had one advantage. There was no body of priests who sought to suppress every man who tried to tell the truth. Swamiji is telling about the Christianity as it prevailed in those days. Galileo Galilei, who first of all told us that the sun is not moving, it is earth moving. They tortured him. He could not tell it openly at all. That was the atmosphere. There was no body of in India it was not there. There was no body of priests who sought to suppress every man who tried to tell the truth. There was always absolute religious freedom. In India, the bondage of superstition is a social one. Here in the West, society is very free, too free. Social matters in India are very strict, but religious opinion is free. In England, a man may dress any way he likes or eat what he likes. No one objects. But if he misses attending church, then Mrs. Grundy is down on him. In Swamiji's days, he has to conform first to what society says on religion, and then he may think of the truth. In India, on the other hand, if a man dines with one who does not belong to his own caste, down comes society with all its terrible powers and crushes him then and there. If he wants to dress a little differently from the way in which his anecdotes, which his ancestors dressed ages ago, he is done for. I have heard of a man who was cast out by society because he went several miles to see the first railway train. Going to America, going outside India, there was such a big superstition. Swamiji described in his own life when he expressed his thought that he will go to foreign. In Pondicherry, some Pandit said, Kadapina, Kadapina, never, never, never. Explanation? No explanation. Lokmanya Tilak had to purify himself in presence of Brahmins after he came back to attend went to attend the roundtable conference in London. Well, we shall presume that was not true. But in religion, we find atheists, materialists, and Buddhists, creeds, opinions, and speculation of every phase and variety, some of a most startling character, living side by side. That is in the society. Preachers of all sects go about teaching and getting adherents, and at the very gates of the temples of gods, the Brahmins, to their credit be it said, allow even the materialists to stand and give forth their opinions. Swamiji says, because of this freedom, the philosophy has grown. In Dasharatha's court, there was a Nastika, and he was honored there for his free opinions. Swamiji is giving the example known to the West. Buddha died at a ripe old age. I remember a friend of mine, a great American scientist, who was fond of reading his life. He did not like the death of Buddha because he was not crucified. What a false idea. For a man to be great, he must be murdered. Such ideas never prevailed in India. Buddha died at a ripe old age. I remember a friend of mine, a great American scientist who was fond of reading his life. He did not like the death of Buddha because he was not crucified. What a false idea. For a man to be great, he must be murdered. Such ideas never prevailed in India. This great Buddha traveled all over India, denouncing our gods and even the God of the universe, and yet he lived to a great old age. For 80 years he lived and had converted half the country. Then there were the Charvakas, materialists, rank materialists, who preached horrible things, the most rank undisguised materialism, such as in the 19th century, they dare not openly preach. These days it is being preached again. The Charvakas were allowed to preach from temple to temple and city to city that religion was all nonsense, that it was priestcraft, that the Vedas were the words and writings of fools, rogues and demons. You know the original Sanskrit. Trayo Vedasya Kartara Bhanda Dhurta Nishachara. That is what the Charvakas told. Vedas were created to suppress the people and get money out of them like that. I will tell you a funny story on this point. A real story. We have a center along in the Arunachal Pradesh. There are many of our centers in Arunachal Pradesh. One is along. And there was a paid worker in our mission. He was Christian by religion. And his father died. And he came to seek help from the ashram that the priests are telling, if you have to send your father to heaven, we require 1000 rupees. And that poor man did not know anything. And our people thought, if he is satisfied, let us help him. So they gave him 1000 rupees. Next week he says that the priests are telling, we have sent your father to heaven, but the hand is still outside. So he required 200 more rupees. So what the Charvakas will say? This charlatanity, who has written the Vedas? Bhanda Dhurta Nishachara. And these Charvakas were allowed to preach and teach throughout India. I told you that in Dasharatha's court there was a atheist like that. And that there was neither God nor an eternal soul. If there was a soul, why did it not come back after death, drawn by the love of wife and child? Their idea was that everybody has his own reason. Reason or rationality has no base. Their idea was that if there was a soul, it must love after death and want good things to eat and nice dress, yet no one heard the Charvakas. Why this topic has come? Swamiji is telling, because of freedom, our religious ideas grew, and because in West the Christians are not given freedom, it did not grow. And in society they are free, so they grow, and we have bound people very badly, So we did not grow. Thus, India has always had this magnificent idea of religious freedom. And you must remember that freedom is the first condition of growth. You cannot force anybody to grow. Freedom is the first condition of growth. It's an important statement in the Ramakrishna mission, in society, wherever the freedom is given, the growth comes. What you do, what you do not make free will never grow. The idea that you can make others grow and help their growth, that you can direct and guide them, always retaining for yourself the freedom of the teacher is nonsense. This is a direct hit at the Christianity at that time. A dangerous lie which has retarded the growth of millions and millions of human beings in the world. Let men have the light of liberty. That is the only condition of growth. Yeah. I do not want to add my experience to that. We in India allowed, I remember one incident here. I am not meaning any criticism towards any religion, please. Some facts I have to narrate, as Swamiji is telling. I went to Goa, a Christian missionary convent school, children's school, and I gave lecture there using two sentences from the Bible. One was, "Be thou perfect even as thy Father in heaven is perfect," from the Sermon on the Mount. And secondly, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And the children were laughing. They were so happy, all of them. At the end of the lecture, I said that you can ask any questions. And the children are unable to ask, teachers can help them. So one teacher came forward and said that we are taught that servant cannot be greater than the master. I told them, servant need not be greater than the master, but does it say that servant cannot be equal to the master? You bring me any one sentence from Bible to show me that servant cannot be equal to the master. I am quoting from the Bible. You contradict my statement. Then she said, but we are taught that we have to have faith, we have to pray to God. I said, yes, praying to God is a means of becoming like God. Who denies that? But we have to pray to God means we are below always. Who has said that? Show me once. Then I was told by my friends, they are not allowed to read the Bible. They have to listen to only the Sunday sermons which they get from the priest. They are not allowed to freely read the Bible. That is why they are baffled by your lecture. So, anyway, freedom is the first condition of growth. We in India allowed liberty in spiritual matters, and we have a tremendous spiritual power in religious thought even today. You grant the same liberty in social matters and so have a splendid social organization. We have not given any freedom to the expansion of social matters, and ours is a cramped society. You have never given any freedom in religious matters, but with fire and sword enforce your beliefs. That is, at a time Christians, later on only Muslims. And the reality is that religion is a stunted, degenerated growth in the European mind. And so they give up religion totally. In India, we have to take off the shackles from society. In Europe, the chains must be taken from the feet of spiritual progress. Then will come a wonderful growth and development of man. If we discover that there is one unity running through all these developments, spiritual, moral, and social, we shall find that religion is the fullest sense of the word. Religion means struggle. Swamiji has defined religion. We have read that man is man so long as he struggles to rise above nature. And this nature is both external and internal. And this struggle, Swamiji calls as religion. So, religion, in the fullest sense of the word, must come into society and into our everyday life. So, it must be practical in every part of life. In the light of Vedanta, you will understand that all sciences are but manifestations of religion that struggle to find the truth. And so is everything that exists in the world. But you have to find direction to that. So in Hinduism also we had all that superstitions. So Swamiji says freedom is there. We see then that through freedom the sciences were built and in them we have two sets of opinions in science. Uh, okay. I think we'll take up this issue next time. Huh? A little beautiful discussion about what science should really be, what religion should really be. Swamiji will take us out and take us out of Maya totally. So we'll take it up on the next one, please. Om Paratatve Sada Lino Ramakrishna Samagya Yo Dharmas Thapana Rato Vire Shamtam Namamyam. Hardly a page is left from this lecture.